Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. Welcome to another Division 2 discussion. We're going to be looking very closely at what the developers have said in regard to specializations making their way into the dark zone for the Division 2. Now, I do have Division 1 footage, and yes, I wanted to basically just show it off a little bit because I wanted the PvP players to reminisce about a time where many of the PvP players have sworn that they had the most fun in the division itself. Now, here are a few things. The developers had not said anything for the longest time, and I decided, it'll be fun to just play other games and cover them, which has been really interesting. But now they're starting to talk, and that's exactly what it is we need to start doing in terms of giving feedback. The earlier that we can say something, the earlier that we can provide some of our opinions, which your opinions and my opinions usually make up the most part of my videos, I think the developers would more than likely be paying attention and can take a few of these things into account. Now, the Dark Zone, getting specialization weapons. Now, let's not get this wrong. I feel like the developers and designers have already had their minds made up on what direction they want to go. There is, in my opinion, very little that we can do to make huge changes in regard to their decision. I think they've already figured out a specific kind of meta that they want to establish within the game. And so the decision to move specializations into the Dark Zone is not one that I'm sure that they've just taken in a likely form. So I think they've done some of the math. I think they've done some of the evaluations, some of the calculations. In fact, they even said that in their the division annex where they write the blog, and they basically mentioned that they have taken a look at a lot of the builds that players run in many cases, and they want to just basically redo the specializations around these builds. So this is where they're getting their information from. So when people say, okay, this might be a bad idea for the Dark Zone, I hope we can all realize that when they already go ahead and do this, there will have to be a huge balance around everything in terms of how gear will work, in terms of how the specialization will work, and in terms of how everything will work while you're in the Dark Zone and also while you're facing other players and also other enemies. So they also mentioned a few things about, dealing damage that's basically along the lines of some PvE modifiers here and there and back and forth. So I guess with that, we already have some kind of, a blueprint as to how they're going to basically get this thing out there. Now, until testing shows up, we're not going to know how this is going to interact with all the brand set builds and the gear set builds and the mixture builds. But I'm hoping that we're going to see something. In fact, if you haven't seen my last video, I propose that we need to have a PTS on all the platforms. I know console is a little challenging to slap a PTS on there, but there is time to execute something like that right now, in my opinion anyways. Maybe there might not be enough time, but they've done it before on the consoles, and I think they probably need to do it again. So the question that's lingering right now is this PvP change going to disrupt the entire game in a negative way? And the answer to that is we cannot necessarily point that out, because the idea behind the PvP change and the specializations is not necessarily for, the specializations to have all this extreme amounts of damage. I think it's designed to change the way players play and build, and even use combinations of different elements in their approach to Dark Zone and even in PvE side. So these kinds of updates are quite similar to what we had in Title Update 6 or 1.6 or something like that, where they took the old style of doing things in terms of the gear sets and the brand sets, where remember in the brand sets, we used to be able to carry talents on almost every piece. And then we had some pieces that were not existing in the different brand groups. And then they changed it all, where we could only have talents on our chest piece and our backpacks. And then they made available to everybody gear pieces for every single brand set in all categories. So what that did was that changed the entire way that we play in terms of, building and all the above. And then they also made some modifiers like damage to elites. Those were stats that were very strong at that time, but they made those modifiers to no longer be something that really existed in excess. And so we're able to build differently in order for us to be able to deal damage. I think this is what they're trying to achieve with this particular changes to the specialization in the game. And so one thing that's also challenging to imagine is they only mention these changes in words. So if you try to picture it and say, okay, so what exactly is this going to look like? I think the idea is, you're going to have to see pretty much a skeleton of what it is right now. So the changes so far from a technical perspective, I think are also changes that are realistic for the development team to pull off. So if you kind of weigh and say, okay, so what changes could have really been made, and should these changes have been made over other changes to be able to maybe rework and restructure the game? And the answer is, it's probably what the development team thought was best and thought was realistic for them to do. That's what they pretty much carried out. So that's basically what we're going to be getting. Now, again, I think this question needs to be asked and this question needs to be answered, maybe from the development team in some form or the other. With all of these changes and all of these reworks, what is the end and what is the end goal for stuff like this? The last huge rework that we got had a huge content piece that dropped with it. This is not just a game mode. So game mode is basically the summit, 99 or 100 floors of you grinding all over the place and whatever. With that, we didn't really get a huge rework. We got some new items. We got some new discoverables and all of the above. But those were things that, were related to that particular game mode and even, the accessibility of more legendary, encounters. Now, if you go back and kind of say, okay, well, what are we going to do with all of these changes so far? Because if you kind of look at the way they've mentioned this is going to change the gear game. And with that change to the gear game, could it be a thing where, some of the non-prioritized gear eventually now start to gain some more relevance? So that's a very good question to ask. That's a very good question for them to answer. But at the end of the day, what are we going to do with all of this? Are we going to farm all these items? Are we going to respec, rechange, kind of, flip the way we build in order for us to play the old content? And this is where the question actually jumps into the PvE side of things. Because, everybody plays PvP and PvE to some level or some degree, depending on where they stand. I don't play PvP at all in Division, at all, any of the Division games. But I do like running the Dark Zone, which is also another environment. And some gear pieces may be, more effective to run through the Dark Zone here and there. So these are some of the things that the developers need to continue to clarify as they're walking through this annex. Now, I'm not saying that they haven't said this, hence everything is being bad. I think sometimes it's easy to, interpret these questions as saying things are going wrong. No, these are just questions that are saying over the course of their revelation and unveiling of what they're doing, they need to find it necessary to kind of continue to provide a little bit more light as to how the direction of this is going. Now, here's the other thing. The game mode also might be one game mode that is substantial enough to be able to allow for that playability where your gear is influential in how you're going to play it. So it may not be a summit type deal. It may be something that, is actually quite tangible. For the longest time, we've talked about other kinds of modes like survival. I guess summit was kind of an iteration of underground in a fresh sense, so they didn't just have an underground. So we don't need an underground anymore. Honestly, I don't want to see it. But if they do it, I guess that's a thing. But, it's kind of hard to envision, though, like this game mode. And so in my opinion, I think whatever this game mode needs to be, they probably need to unlock a few dimensions of what the missions are if they don't necessarily want to do too much work. And to me, I think that's basically allowing for legendary play of a lot of the different missions. In the Division 1, we got the legendary plays for specific missions and stuff. But with the Division 2 having stayed a whole year without getting anything, I think those legendary strongholds at least need to be, iterated at minimum. And then some really interesting missions in this game, also need to get a legendary. I guess they could go with missions that are actually more popular or missions that are heavily played. Or maybe they could go with missions that are not necessarily heavily played. This is something that they can take a play on because they have the data as to who's playing what and who's not playing what. But at the end of the day, these specialization changes and, these new, iterations that they want to make is exciting for many members of the community. But it doesn't necessarily hit home not knowing exactly how we're going to be using, a lot of this stuff, So right now, I guess they want to do a drip type of marketing. But I don't really know if that's necessarily as helpful as it will be because, they started out from the technical and then they're now going to go to the much more, broad aspect. I think they should have started from the broad aspect and then gone to the much more technical. But again, this is different for, whoever is all here and available. Hamish is no longer here. A lot of the former community teams are no longer here. So I guess they're probably just working with what it is that they have. But again, I would love to hear your thoughts about that aspect of the specializations, PvP, PvE changes, and potentially what this new game mode will look like, whether it's going to be something that would have to bring missions or bring new iterations of missions. Let me know what you think in the comment section. All right, that's it for me. I'll talk to you guys very soon in another video. Stay tuned to the channel, and if you've been watching my other content, I appreciate you guys so much. Talk to you all soon. Peace out.